This week, we welcome Michael McPherson, product marketer at ExtraHop, to discuss how to solve the security paradox. In the leadership and communication section, 7 pressing cybersecurity questions boards need to ask. 7 mistakes CISOs make when presenting to the board. Let's see if those align. CISO checklists for offboarding security staff and more. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly. Cybercriminals are working overtime. Last year in the fourth quarter alone, phishing attacks disguised as COVID testing information increased by 521%. Barracuda has identified 13 types of email threats and how cybercriminals use them to steal money from your company or personal information from your employees and customers. Find out about the 13 email threat types and how Barracuda can provide complete email protection for your teams, your customers, and your reputation. Get your free ebook at securityweekly.com/Barracuda. That's securityweekly.com/Barracuda. People require access from anywhere to resources everywhere, but legacy security is ill-equipped for today's hybrid organization. Appgate STP delivers zero-trust network access for hybrid workforces and workloads, empowering trusted users with secure, frictionless connections to only what they need. Make your attack surface invisible and reduce time to provision by 91% with Appgate SDP, a leader in the 2021 Forrester ZTNA New Wave. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Appgate. Account takeovers, malicious campaigns, impersonation, and data breaches are on the rise, driven by the pandemic and security challenges of a remote workforce. The number one most common attack vector in breaches is compromised credentials. Constella Intelligence protects your key employees from digital risk by continuously monitoring the deep, dark, and surface web for exposed credentials, detecting threats that others miss with real-time alerts to protect you and your company from a targeted attack. Try it free at securityweekly.com/Constella.
Welcome to Business Security Weekly. This is episode number 253, recorded March 7th, 2022. I am your host, Matt Alderman, here in Colorado, but the countdown's on. Only 4 episodes left for me in the state of Colorado. Yes, the big move is coming. Joining remotely are my co-hosts. First, Mr. Jason Albuquerque from Rhode Island. Welcome, Jason.
Hey there, Matt. It's 57 degrees here. It's shorts weather in New England. I love it. This is beautiful.
Yeah, snow and 9 degrees this morning. This is why I'm moving to Texas.
You can't wait for Texas then, huh?
Oh, no. Gotta warm up, man. Also, filling in for Mr. Ben Carr, who is still in Israel, is Mr. Tyler Robinson from Idaho.
Thanks, Matt. I'm kind of looking forward to you living in Texas so I can come see you during the winter so I can have the best of both worlds.
Yeah, see, I'm going to play in July and August. I'm coming to Idaho.
Sounds good, man. We'll make a good trade there.
All right. Don't miss any of your favorite Security Weekly content. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to any of our podcast feeds and have all new episodes downloaded right to your phone. You can also join our mailing list, Discord server, and follow us on social media and our streaming platforms. This segment is sponsored by ExtraHop. To learn more, please visit securityweekly.com/ExtraHop. Michael McPherson leads managed threat detection and incident response services marketing at ExtraHop. He has over 20 years in cloud, security, and network product marketing on both the product and services delivery side. Michael's passionate about developing and growing solutions that solve real problems and impacts the lives of users. Michael, welcome to Business Security Weekly.
Thank you, Matt. Glad to be here.
So we get all these new people from ExtraHop to join us for these interviews, which is kind of fun because we get to meet the rest of the team. So as ExtraHop continues to grow, we get more and more people to come on. We're going to talk about the security paradox. And the way this was kind of written in the original description is we might get more money, but that doesn't necessarily we're getting better security or that the problem's getting easier to solve. Let's start a little bit with the problem side of this equation. What does the security paradox mean?
Well, it's a great question, Matt. So, in my position, I get to talk to both customers and also the practitioners, as well as deal with the product managers and development side. So, what we see is that as investments have gone up, talking about billions of dollars on the security side, at the same time, we're seeing customers talk about how the effectiveness of ransomware seems to be increasing. So security investments are going up, but the ability to protect seems to be going the opposite direction. We hear about security analysts being overwhelmed by threat volumes. Fatigue still seems to be going down, while the security and supposedly automation seems to be going up. So there's a paradox, there's a problem. The tenor of the conversations I have with customers have changed over the last couple of years. Now you're hearing customers talk about cyber insurance. You're hearing them talk about Bitcoin and how to pay ransomware. It's almost as if they've resigned themselves to the fact that they will be breached, that they are a target to be the subject of extortion, but yet investments in security is still going up. So what's the actual root cause of the problem, and how do we address and solve the problem are things we're looking at today.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about this from a couple different angles. One is, do I have the budget, and do I need more budget, and how do I spend that budget? I've always also been a kind of on the forefront of saying, but even if we got the money, are we spending it on the right things? I think there's a lot of historical things that we spend money on that may or may not be as effective today as they were 5, 10, 15 years ago, but they're still somehow attached to our budget and we still pay for it. So I a few years back, I just asked a simple question. If applications, user, and data security are the most important, how much are you spending on those three buckets compared to all the other buckets? It was a rhetorical question, but I think it's a valid question in that even if I get the budget, Michael, am I spending it on the right thing? So how do we think about approaching the problem differently when we get budgets?
Well, you're absolutely right. And what we've found out is that we really have to apply a certain methodology to solve the problem. First of all, what is the problem, and can we agree on a common goal, not only on the security and IT side, but how does it align with the business? So, for example, there's a very large defense contractor. And so what their CISO has done, they have gotten together with the business leaders and said, based upon our operational metrics, what's important to the business, what's critical to the business, we have to set a dwell time of 30 minutes or less, meaning from the time an intruder enters the network, from the time they're either isolated or contained. So now the security side has set a common goal that aligns with the business priorities and the operational aspects that all members of the executive team can agree on. And based upon that common goal, then they look at first the processes, then the systems and the people to actually achieve that goal. So the technology is actually looked at further down in terms of the process and the path forward to working it out. We don't respond to the latest vendor pitch, even though we are a vendor, but we really respond to certain methodology where we look at the common goal, the common risk. What do we agree on that KPI, and what are the processes, systems, and the people requirements needed to achieve that?
This 100% supports the conversations that we've been having on Business Security Weekly here for years now, right, Matt? It's getting that CISO to align with the business, understand the business, build relationships with all of the key stakeholders, and build business strategies, risk management strategies, and then drive that into the security and IT organizations, right? And build those execution plans. Instead of working in a silo, right? Versus working in a silo thinking we're going to put the next blinky light or throw a whole bunch of people at a problem, that's not the solution. The solution is to understand the business and align the strategies to that.
I think one of the other major issues that you run into that we commonly hear is, while we end up getting more visibility, and you're 100% right, the collaborative nature, getting that visibility, having the buy-in and support, top down, bottom up, all the divisions, is fantastic. You have to have that. The hardest thing, I think, once you start to get to that point, though, is really figuring out the prioritization of each of those strategies and each of those initiatives. for a meaningful and secure deployment. Like maybe at this point in time, identity management, because of the current attack trends, because of what's going on outside, because of the current world political situation, things need to get moved around. So the hardest thing I think a lot of people, as we're helping them consult, their biggest complaint is always about what is the best priority? How do we address this? And in which order do we allocate that money? We have the money, we have the people, and we have the buy-in. Now, how do we actually figure out what is the first thing to start with and the priorities there?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's why aligning to the common goals and the risks associated to the organization is important. Internally, I think I shared this story last week, right? I'm working with our chief data officer, for example, Michael, and he's got a report up to the board around our risk management and security strategy. And I said, well, let's start with our risks. What do we believe the risks are to the business? We have financial risk, we have regulatory risk, we have reputational risk, might have some others, right? And then I said, well, let's look at the threats against those risks that are most applicable to us. And then we were going down this path of risks to threats to security controls, right? And to Tyler's point a little bit, once we align on a common set of goals and objectives, now I can start to prioritize, can't I? And then start to think about technology, not the other way around.
You're absolutely correct. So what you brought up is a great point. When I look at security, I look at it in the same vein as operational management or operational management consulting or just business strategy in general. So once you have defined those, what we're calling it common goals, the common risks, and the threats, then it becomes easier then to assign, well, what are the things we have to do? But before we actually put in the technology piece of it to decide on the proper technology and the prioritization, what I start looking at are the processes. So for example, today you'll hear a lot of customers complain or talk about they're being challenged because they either have redundant technology, they have technology which is either outdated, or they have so many pieces of technology that is stressing the entire IT environment, not only from the security analyst perspective, but from the IT perspective. So my argument is, what are the processes that first need to be in place before that technology can be effective? So for example, we have a great proof point with many of the new VC-funded MDR firms, managed detection and response firms, managed services firms, in other words. And what they're doing is, if I look at what the common goals are and the common risks, what are the processes I need to put in place so I can go from 500 or thousands of alerts down to one alert? And what are the touch points, whether it's access management, whether it's prevention controls, whether it's detection things, what are the processes in place? Because very rarely what we find out, especially when we look at what we like calling it extra, the SOC triad, where especially in the large enterprises, you have SIMs, you have EDR, you have all these other technologies. But what we hear is that they're generating so many alerts, so many issues that they're really not solving the core problem. So what are the processes we need to put in place to effectively get down to that ultimate goal, which is, again, whatever it is, whether it's dwell time, whatever the KPI. When we look at what the processes and that we have to put in place, then we start saying, okay, what are the technologies and people now we have to put in place to enable that particular process to achieve this particular result, which has these benefits for the organization, but then also has benefits for our employees as well that have to execute on that.
Right, because if you know the processes and the touch points, it's not just about the technology, but it's the technology integration points, right? Because I think that's one of the big challenges, right? Is I may have the technology, but they're not connected in a way for us for organizations really to figure out what's going on to get down to that single kind of common goal. And it's those integration points that are important, because if those are missing, then it's going to put more stress on the process, because I may or may not have the people. We're going to talk about people in a second, but those integration points are so critical.
Absolutely right. I mean, there's a stat, I think, that said 60% of security systems still aren't integrated. A lot of times we're moving on to technology, but then I come back to the process and I'm like, well, majority of these customers we're dealing with still aren't integrated, still aren't experiencing the benefits of automation and the promise we've had. So again, we go back to what are the processes and what do we need to execute in the processes? And once we agree this process has to work and be fully viable to achieve the common goal to combat those common risks, then we put it in place. But if I'm buying this technology and I still can't integrate it, then you're going back to stressing the people out, because now what are you relying on? You're relying on labor and manual processes because you haven't achieved that automation to achieve that common goal.
Yeah, Michael. I mean, this is yet another one of those. This is yet another one of those strategies that we consider say easy but do hard, right? I mean, over the course of my career, in order to drive down to that level where you're having conversations around integrated processes and technologies, I spent a lot of time during my budgeting sessions with all of my key stakeholders talking about the upcoming strategic objectives and organizational goals, the business initiatives that they're going to be looking to achieve over the course of the next year. What are their business capabilities in order to execute against those, right? Because, that's where your fact-finding mission comes into play. That's where you start realizing what the vision of each individual business unit is in the upcoming year, their ability to execute, whether they're going to be able to do it internally, they're going to hire new staff, they're going to bring in contractors. Those are all key important points that you're going to have to figure out what risk comes in there. And then you start building out those value streams to talk about IT capability and process capability. But you can't get to that level until you build those relationships and you have those higher level strategic discussions. And what I used to do every year was bake it into my budgeting sessions. I had budgeting sessions with every single business unit leader to talk about the next year's strategy. And then we would have monthly and quarterly checkpoints to see if there's any deviations from there, right? Because we needed to be able to spin on a dime, and we needed to be able to reallocate or recalculate risk on a dime as well. So it's that continuous touch point over time, over the course of that year, to make sure you're adjusting your plans as needed.
And that timed integration is actually critical. It's one of the things that you can tell some people that are senior or have done this for a little while. They take into account, they recalculate, like you said, they bring the stakeholders back in, they have those ongoing conversations through those relationships to make sure that that time to integration matches, because you often get a product that can be deployed. Maybe it's a better product, but the amount of resources it takes and the time to integration, most things integrate between each other, but that time to integration and level of effort to integrate also plays a factor to where you're right. It could end up being out of date or end of life or replaceable by the time you can actually get to that integration point, because there's not enough resources or time. So you have to think about those things as part of that strategic vision and with the stakeholders that matter.
And the other piece too, Tyler, is consolidation, right? Taking a look at all the tools and technologies you have today, and is there an opportunity to consolidate into a single platform, right? And take a look at that as well. That's always an option, and I always took that as something that we would consider in the forefront. Is there an opportunity to get economies of scale? Is there an opportunity to give, that same look and feel and experience for our users of the technology, right? To make the experience better, make them more efficient, make them more effective, and start breaking down those silos. So, I always looked at that consolidation as an opportunity as well.
You're absolutely right. So in my position, I get to sit on the customer success side. So once a product is sold, and now we have to deploy and get users onboarded and et cetera. And then I also get to look at the customer satisfaction scores and which customers are being successful, which need more help. So one of the interesting things I've found over the last 2 years is that those customers that are challenged or have more difficulty, I always go back to what happened at the end of the sales cycle. Did that customer have an operationalization plan? More times than not, the solution was purchased, but there was no operationalization plan. And by the time the product got on board, they're thinking, they throw it to Johnny, they throw it to Sue, hey, go to training, use it. There was no plan. And then to your point, if they're resource constrained, then it could become shelfware. And so one of the challenges we have as a technology organization is, where do we interject that knowledge, that advice, that consultation within the whole process, the purchasing or the buy cycle? So before you buy it, If you're focused on outcomes, which I think almost 99.99% of organizations would say they're focused on outcomes, it's not just the purchase. How are you going to get this within the value stream of your organization? Have you thought through that? And surprisingly, we find many organizations have not thought through. The decision maker, the economic buyer has thought through, I need this, but are the other parts of the organization involved in that whole buying process to say you can buy it, but you're going to need this to achieve that specific outcome? And when customers struggle, more oftentimes than not, I found out that whole piece was just avoided or never considered as part of the whole
Michael,
life cycle.
I absolutely love hearing that, because the most successful organizations that are going to have a positive impact on their customers are the ones that guide them through adoption, right?
Yes.
It's one thing to go buy the expensive tool. It's another thing to adopt the tool and get the value out of the tool. There's so many instances where we see organizations adopting 20% of the capability of the expensive platform that they just invested in. How are they going to be expected to be successful in any way, shape, or form if they're only adopting 20% of that investment? You know, the goal of these customer success teams is get them up to 80+% adoption of the technology. Now you start to see success.
Absolutely right. Couldn't agree with you more.
Michael, when I think about that, I think about lack of resources, and or lack of skills for those resources, right? Because you have to think about who's going to manage this thing, who's going to get it deployed, who's going to get it adopted across the organization. And that's the people aspect of this. And I think we know, we've seen the stats, we've covered the stats on this show. We know there's a gap in skills out there and resources. So how does an organization address the people side of this equation if they don't have the resources or skills in-house to do it? Where do they go next?
Well, it's a great point. And it goes back to our original premise, was that you're looking to buy a solution. You're looking to really buy a certain outcome. And so one of the challenges we have is communicating to the customer that once we go through the thought process we've just described, and then we go to how we're actually going to enable and execute these processes and enable these systems, then we take a look at what are the people. Now, when we look at the people, it's not just skill set, and obviously we have to look at availability and resources, but we also have to look at what do they need to have a satisfied job? What do they need to have job satisfaction, so we're not dealing with turnover and security analysts, every 6 months and have it to retool all the time? So once we take a good look through the whole process, then we ask the questions, are we able to do that? Do we have that core competency to achieve that? If not, there are many vendors that are not providing these services as a managed services, and there are multiple flavors of that, from part-time outsourcing of individuals who are either analysts or consultants or engineers, to the full-blown managed services. But again, it takes a cold, hard look. So Jason brought up the point about consolidation. Once we've gone through that process, well, how do I free up somebody? Can I consolidate this tool? If I'm only using something for 10%, do I actually really need it? Can I get them more value? So how do I free up that person to make them more productive and successful and enjoying their job at the same time, enabling the processes? So I think, we could take a look at that, because one of the things we did when we do business justification for some of our customers, we look at the tool consolidation, we look at redundancy, and we also look at the productivity of the individuals involved. So we'll go through and say, well, if you do this, and if you stop doing these things, you can either budget where you can make your folks more productive, or you can either have a budget avoidance, new hires, because now you're able to do these things. But all these other things have to happen for that to work. So we try to lead them to take a cold, hard look at that. And because, again, we try to stress is you want to buy an outcome. You don't want to buy a product or technology that sits on the shelf, or you don't want to have that hard discussion with your CEO or board who's asking, I spent all this money. Why am I in this position? Why is my security compromised? So it's that type of conversation you try to have with as many customers or prospects as possible.
Yes, agreed. Last question. We talk about outcomes. How do I measure those outcomes? How do I report outcomes back? How do I have to approach that component? Because I just went through this beautiful process, right? I've aligned my goals and my risks. I've gone through my processes. I've looked at the technologies, consolidation, automation. I've looked at my skill sets, my onboarding, etc. I have to report back at some point how we're doing. How do we approach the reporting and the metric side of aligning back to those outcomes in the beginning?
Well, so at the beginning of the process, we talked about looking at common goals and then common risks. So very similar to a business performance or performer sheet, where I may have a P&L sheet with, what am I doing in my profits, or if I'm having to deal with inventory, what are my inventory turns, and so forth. I establish a common thing. I use the example of a very large defense contract at the beginning. Their key KPI, their key operational metric, which they reported to the board and to the executive, was dwell time. They said this particular metric incorporates multiple factors. I'm not going to, bore you with MTTR and so forth. Dwell time actually impacts my specific outcome. Something came in, I isolated, contained it. 30-minute is my operational metric. How am I doing with that particular operational metric? So they made it very simple for the executive team. Now, underneath that, there are other leading indicators which can contribute to that. Obviously, you have your mean time to response and detection and so forth. But I also like to measure the productivity of my employee, their job satisfaction, because if they are dissatisfied and unable to enable those processes and systems technologies, the whole plan just falls apart. But I look at that one operational metric, which is very easy to report to the board, and then I can have my underlying or my leading indicators which affect that particular one. But I have a major one because literally, most executives, they don't care about mean time to response. What does that mean? All I care about is that I'm not, my security isn't compromised and I don't end up in the news. That was one security actually was a private equity person told me. He said the one thing they care about, the one thing he hears when he talks to the executive is, I don't want to end up in the news. So maybe that's your KPI. I don't want to end up in the news. That's my KPI. Fine, great. That's what I report. Have you no, you haven't been in the news. I've achieved my operational metrics. So whatever that is, then I can have my underlying leading indicators up till then.
Right, but you said the magic word for Jason, leading indicators.
100%. That just my spidey sense just went off because that's so important, right? Again, building that strategy with the executives in the organization, building out that goals cascade, initiative prioritization sessions, talking about roadmaps for those initiatives. At the end of all that, there has to be metrics that you can be measured on. And 100% agreed, there needs to be lead indicators and lag indicators all the time. Has to be embedded into your metrics. It can't be one or the other. It has to be both. Those lag indicators are your ability to look in the rearview mirror, but those lead indicators allow you to look through the windshield and say, do I need to turn? Do I need to take a different road here? What do I need to do to make sure that I get on point? So that lag indicator is where we want it to be. It allows you to be agile. You have to have both.
Some of those indicators do rely on the fact that you do have good visibility, though, or that you have a way to measure those, right? Because if you're just getting started, you're immature in the stack, you have visibility gaps between multiple companies, that kind of leaves for the unknown, which you can, I guess, calculate into that variable, but that is also something to consider.
Yeah, one of the things that I try to always make known as I'm building out KPIs with the business unit leaders is, as we design these KPIs together, number one, they need to be achievable, and secondly, they need to be measurable. That's the common goal that we have together as we design these. And as we come up with KPIs and we think about them, we say, are they achievable? Yes or no? Okay, good. How do we measure that? And then we sit back and say, all right, is it measurable or is it not? And if it's not measurable, we scrap it.
So you got the MA of the SMART.
Yeah,
Michael,
that is
you were saying.
Fantastic point. No, I was saying that's a fantastic point. And two things. Tyler talked about visibility. So I go back to the original thing where when we start this process, and it really ties in with both what Tyler and Jason were saying, when we start talking about our common goals and we say, what are the processes we have to enable? One of the things we talk about is visibility. You talked about, is it achievable? Is it measurable? Do I have visibility? They don't. What's up? What we found out, which is very interesting, is that one of the obstacles to visibility is too much technology and the silos they create. So these are where you have these hard discussions. What are the obstacles? Do I need to consolidate? Do I need to do this to achieve that? And, is it measurable? So it's great conversations, and it requires a thought process that if we did it more often, I think most companies would end up with more of the outcomes that they're looking to achieve.
Yeah, that's a great point, Michael. Just because we have an abundance of data doesn't mean we have visibility.
That's right.
Data. It could be data overload, and that's how so many organizations are just getting swamped. Data overload.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Sure. Michael, thank you so much for joining us on Business Security Weekly.
Been my pleasure. Thank you for having me, Matt.
If you want to learn more about how to build a systematic approach to solving security, please visit securityweekly.com/extrahop. We're going to take a quick break and then cover the leadership and communications articles for this week.